New Testament reading today is from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 17 through 22. And you can follow along on the Pew Bible on page 173. Now in the following instructions I do not commend you, because when you came together, it is not for the better, but for the worse. For to begin with, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and to some extent, I do believe it. Indeed, they have to be factions among you, for only so will it become clear who among you are genuine. When you come together, it is not really to eat the Lord's Supper, for when the time comes to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one goes hungry, and another becomes drunk. What? Do you not have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you show contempt for the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What should I say to you? Should I commend you? In this matter, I do not commend you. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. I don't know how many of you enjoy dining out. I think everybody enjoys it to some degree. But I imagine most of us dine out when we get the opportunity to, when we want to, or when we find it affordable, which is becoming, as we know, harder and harder. Have you dined out lately? Those prices are going up and those portions are getting smaller. However, we still go out, don't we? It's nice to do that. I imagine it would also be true to say that when we do dine out, we will go to a restaurant where we like the food. Now, you know, there are probably sometimes we like to try a new place, right? And Tucson has so many incredible restaurants. In this town, it's amazing. And so we may go to a new place, but normally, when we really want to go and dine out, we go to a place that we're familiar with, that we know, that we love, and where the food, in our opinion, is wonderful. Because doing otherwise would defeat the whole purpose of going out, right? You go out to dinner for the food. I imagine one could go out to dinner strictly for the atmosphere. But in the end, that is not what one pays for at a restaurant. It is the food that matters. We may be willing to put up with less than satisfactory service if the food is good. Sometimes, however, we may find ourselves dining out for a reason that has nothing to do with food. I have been doing this ministry for 44 years at wedding receptions where the food is usually not a priority. Weddings. Most of the time, the food is pretty good, but if one seeks a gourmet experience, it probably will not be found at a wedding reception. Occasionally that's happened, but probably it doesn't matter. It shouldn't be, right? A sit-down dinner at a wedding is one of those meals where the meaning of the event takes precedent over the amount or the quality of the food. There are other meals in our culture that we share in which the meaning of the gathering exceeds the meal itself. Anniversaries, retirements, dinner shows, events with speakers or training. I could go on, but they all usually have the same type of meal, which we would recognize by a very specific label. It's called banquet food. Banquet food. And when I say that word, you probably know immediately what I am talking about. Banquet food is different from when we go out to eat. Normally, we don't go out to a restaurant and go, oh, I'd like banquet food today. And we don't sit at our table saying, hey, let's make some banquet food. Just like we gather for meaningful meals in our culture, so there were meaningful meals in the time of Paul, in the earliest years of the Christian church. But in the pagan world of the Roman Empire, those dinner gatherings were very much at odds with the meaning and the purpose of the Christian community. One of the foundational social enterprises of Rome was the concept of the collegium, or the dining club. Groups with very specific interests, either religious or business or social, gathered for elaborate dinners that were structured to reflect the hierarchy of the extremely stratified Roman society. That was a very stratified culture, as you know. The wealthy Roman men would recline around a table loaded with the best of the feast, the best of that particular cooking for that time and in that place, while the poor invitees would recline around a separate table with poor quality food. If wives or women were invited, which was very, very rare, they were not allowed to recline, but ate their meal seated at their own table with their own separate food. Slaves could only stand and were allowed only to eat the scraps or the leftovers from the table after the gathering had concluded. At many of these collegias, I guess you call them, they were called colleges, but at many of these gatherings, there was a great deal of drinking and other bad things going on. Not that drinking is bad, but other bad, horrible things going on, such as sexual activity. And that was with the slaves, who had no choice but to obey the demands of their intoxicated masters. That was a common part of life in the culture of the Roman Empire. It is this unfortunate manner of group dining that has infected the early Christian church, particularly in the city of Corinth, which was deeply influenced by the Greek, Roman, and Asian population. Corinth was a crosstown or crossroads community and had every type of culture in it. The only formal meal that the Christian community practiced was the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. But it wasn't anything like the way we think of it now. It always followed Sunday worship, and it was more like a regular meal. In the eyes of many church members, mostly Gentiles who had come from the pagan culture, the Lord's Supper for them was little more than a community supper club, where the manners for the meal was a reflection, basically, of their former manner of living. See, this is very early in Christianity. Remember, Paul's letters were printed before the Gospels. That's what the church had first. So what Paul's writing about is how the church is trying to teach its members to approach the table. They're treating it like a supper club, as Paul says. And they're doing things that are not appropriate for the community of faith to do. Paul is aware of the problem and attacks this practice directly in his letter to the church of Corinth, which was also written at that time for the whole church and still greatly matters to us today. When you come together, it is not really to eat the Lord's Supper. He's criticizing the Corinthians. For when the time comes to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one goes hungry, and another becomes drunk. Does that sound like communion? Do you show contempt for the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What should I say to you? In that question, we hear all of Paul's anger and frustration that they're not getting the meal. They're not understanding it. Paul is not reproaching the Christians of Corinth for their bad manners in the way that in which we understand the word manners, which we just talked about. As we said, manners kind of still matters, although you won't hear much talk about that. In fact, some have said, is it even possible to talk about manners in 21st century America when there are so many other more important things that we need to talk about? But manners matter. Pierre Fiorini, co-founder of the Civility Project at Johns Hopkins, describes the relevancy of manners in this way. The rules of good manners are the traffic lights of human interaction. They make it so that we do not crash into one another in everyday behavior. Obviously, if it mattered for someone to teach you manners, do you think it matters for us to teach our children manners? Teach our children manners. Do you think it does? You've heard me use this quote before in the pulpit. It's one of my favorites. It's from Socrates, written 2,500 years ago. Our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for their elders and love chatter in place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up their food, and tyrannize their teachers. That was written 2,500 years ago. So manners mattered to Socrates. But we're talking about a different type of manner. Paul was speaking not to the Christians, not in the way that Socrates was speaking. Paul was not talking about manners, but the single word manner, a word defined by the dictionary as a characteristic or customary mode of acting. Paul was trying to move the congregation beyond the simple custom of a shared meal and into the very heart of the meaning of the Lord's Supper. For Paul, the way the meal was shared was in direct relation to the way that Christ teaches us to live as loving and humble partners in the Christian life. Partners who have gathered not to eat, but to worship. And that's why our manner of the Lord's table is one of a spiritual meal, one in which believers are literally gathered together at the table with the risen Christ through the presence of the Holy Spirit. You know, they always say, or you've been told before, certainly I have told our children, you need to be on your best behavior. But actually, here at the table, we bring our worst behaviors. That's why Christ went to the cross. We bring with us to the table all that's wrong with us, all we're struggling with in our lives, all that's broken for us. We bring here so that Christ may take us into his loving arms and feed us with healing and hope and grace. That's the wonder of the Lord's Supper. We don't have to have manners. We just need to come in the manner for which Christ gave it to us. That's why the problem with the Christians of Corinth was not their table manners, but the manner in which they acted as disciples of the Son of God. And that's why this morning you and I need to think about our manner of Christianity and where we are falling short. Paul was really talking about that, especially in Romans, when he said, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, which is why I say this table is for everyone. He didn't say just this denomination has sinned or just Christians have sinned. He says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So, the manner by which we approach the Lord's Supper is with the question, where are we falling short? Do we believe with all of our hearts and our souls and our minds and our strength? Do we love those around us in the same way that we love ourselves? Have we taken the yoke of Christ upon us? The answer to those questions are not found in a book of etiquette, but they're found right here as we come together to eat this spiritual food. And if we do so in the right manner, as brothers and sisters joined to Christ, we will walk away more satisfied than by any other food that we've ever eaten. We will walk away full of the Spirit, full of the grace, full of the peace, that peace which passeth understanding, and full of the call that calls us to go out and share this spiritual food with the world through the things that we do, through our manners as Christians. This is the bread of life. This is the cup of love. And Christ is here this morning to share it with us. Manners matter. And I'm not talking about where you put your knife and fork and spoon. I'm not talking about a knife and fork and a spoon and a cup. I'm talking about love and faith and grace. So let us approach this table with remembrance and joy. Amen.